Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that you're all here. This is the very first episode of my new YouTube channel called the Bugsy Collection. I've started a YouTube channel called the Bugsy Collection. I've also started an Instagram account called the Bugsy Collection. And the purpose of both of these platforms is going to be to share about baseball cards and things that I love in the hobby and cards that I've picked up. So a lot of this will be looking forward and talking about things in the future. But a huge part of this channel and part of my collecting journey is going to be talking about my dad, who at some point when I was 10 or 11 years old, I gave the nickname Bugsy. And that's what I'm going to talk about is my dad, our collecting journey together, a lot of the stories that are still such a big and important part of my life. So I wanted to do this I'm kind of at a stage in my life now where all of a sudden all of our kids are grown and they're out of the house and they actually live in different cities than we do right now. We're very involved with our church and doing the things that we've always wanted to do that we've never had enough time to do, but I do find myself with more time than I used to have. So here I am. I'm back in the hobby. So I feel like as part of this origin story, I need to take you all the way back to the beginning of my hobby journey, and then kind of that'll lead into how we got back to where we are today, to present time. So I'm a product of the 70s and the 80s, really the 80s. Grew up, don't have any brothers or sisters, only child. And I started collecting with my dad back in the 80s. And initially it was just me, and I was, just buying and ripping packs, and my dad wasn't really into it. And at some point early on, I'm not real sure how my dad got into it, but he got the bug. And we started collecting, and my dad started buying. And this was back in the 80s. Of course, it was pre-internet. There were no, you did all your deals in person. You went to card shops. You went to baseball card shows. And back in the 80s, cards were exploding back in the 80s. And there were tons of baseball card shows here. There were always a show either at a hotel, there'd be a local show at a mall. So we started going to all of these shows and buying cards. Somewhere along the way, I don't remember exactly where, we also got into autographs. And back in the 80s, in the area here, there was always someone signing. Usually you didn't have to pay. There would be, we would scour, my dad would just constantly scour the newspaper. He would watch the news. He would look for people who would be making public appearances in town, promoting a product, promoting a service. And you could go, we would just go and crash these events, get people's autographs. We went to a lot of minor league baseball games here in town. We got tons of autographs there. We started going to baseball card shows here locally, and people started popping up. There was a guy that he started having shows that were a little bit bigger, and he would have Hall of Famers at the shows, and you did start having to pay a little bit. Looking back, we were paying $4, $5, $6, and we thought that was crazy to have to pay that for an autograph. But we do this, and I'm really heavy into it. And then I get to college, and it's late 80s now, early 90s. I'm in college, and I kind of move on from my baseball card collecting, but my dad keeps on doing it. And he wasn't really into, back then, he wasn't really into vintage. We have some cards now that Dad has quite a few actually that would be considered vintage now, but we didn't have a lot of money. So we didn't buy a lot of the big cards, but we weren't in it for the cards. We were in it for the fun. And so we would have something to do and to hang out with each other. And Dad would, he would just, every year when the new tops would come out, he'd buy a box, rip it, make a set. Buy a box, rip it, make a set every year. And we met so many great people along the way. I gotta put my glasses on because we made a few notes. And I just remember when I was probably 12 or 13, the very first dealer type of a person that we met was a man by the name of Walter Griffin. And Walter Griffin owned a cleaners, maybe a couple of cleaners here in the area. And he was an older guy, and Dad struck up a friendship with him. And he would set up at the shows, and at one point we, there was no internet, there was no email. So if you needed something in between shows or wanted something in between shows and you were friends with somebody, you would just call them and they would ask you over to their house and you would just do the deal right there. So we went over to Walter's house one day for something, and he had a really nice house in a really nice area. And he said, well, let's go upstairs to my card room. And I thought, card room? What in the world is a card room? So we go upstairs in his house, and he had this card room, and he just had amazing cards. Cards from the 50s, cards from the 60s. And the thing that I remember, this would have been probably 1985, and I remember he had every single top set that there had been up to that point, starting in 1952. And he had each top set in a binder. And it was in this case that was on the wall. And man, it was just like I was in the Smithsonian Institution. I couldn't believe it. But he was just so nice. And we would go to shows, like I said, I kind of got out of it in college, but I would still go to shows periodically with my dad, and Walter would still be there. And he, would ask, how are things going with me? What are you doing with your life? Where are you going to school? There's so many good people we met along the way. There was another guy named Ed Gaddy. He had a card shop here in town called E. Gadd's, the first card shop purely dedicated to baseball cards that there was in the area. We would go over there. We would have so much fun sitting down, going through his commons, pulling commons to make sets. There was another fellow that we met named Big Jim. And we met Big Jim when we would go to shows in Alabama. And Big Jim's thing was, so when we would go to shows, because we didn't have a lot of money to buy cards to get people to sign, the Hall of Famers that were signing autographs, they would always have they'd always have an 8x10 that they were selling. So we would buy these 8x10s, you could get it for $2 or $3, and we would get the Hall of Famer to sign it. Let me grab something right back here. I meant to get this before I started. So what Big Jim did is Big Jim made these cool holders for the 8x10 that you just got signed, and he would always be at the shows. And here's an example of one. That's a Hank Aaron that we got signed. And Big Jim put it in that frame. Big Jim is probably long gone by now because he was not a young man back then, but he is another guy that was just so nice. There was a fellow here in town named Bill Clifford, and Bill Clifford was, he was a dealer. He was a super quiet guy, and he was very quiet. I'll leave it at that, but he had such good stuff. We would go to Bill Clifford's house and do deals. Our best friend back then in the hobby was a fellow by the name of Travis Porter. And Travis Porter was, he was a little bit younger than my dad. Travis lived in a town probably 20 minutes away from where we lived. And Travis was a bachelor. And he lived in a condo. And when you went in the condo, he had the living room. Behind the living room, he had his little small kitchen. and then you went upstairs to the bedrooms. Imagine a small condo with a bachelor that is wall-to-wall baseball cards. There was actually, you could barely find a place to sit, and this wasn't his job, it was just a hobby. He had stuff everywhere, and if it was a card that we needed, Travis had it. In his kitchen was almost like, it was small, but it was almost like catacombs. There were just boxes stacked up in the kitchen, but Travis was just such a nice guy. There was another guy here in town by the name of Ray Dunning. And Ray is the fellow who put on the baseball card shows that I was talking about at the hotels when Hall of Famers started coming in and signing. And Ray was a really nice guy as well that my dad and I got to know. And Ray really wasn't into baseball cards, and he wasn't even so much into the autographs. What he liked doing is he put these shows on and had these Hall of Famers in, because he was then able to spend some time with whoever the Hall of Famer was. And he just really liked being able to rub elbows and talk about history and talk about baseball with these Hall of Famers. And he would share some of these stories with me and my dad. And we just had, it was just fun. I mean, we bought a lot of cool cards. I still have a lot of those cool cards. But looking back and really thinking about it and thinking about how I grew up, it wasn't about the cards. The cards were really a gateway to meet the people in the community and the folks that we just had so much fun with. I think I left out a couple of things. Guys, like I said, I've never done this before. I'll get better at making these videos. I'm just doing this first one on my phone because I got inspired to do it, and I didn't want to wait until I learned how to use StreamYard. So I'll get better. My presentation will get better. I'll be able to do fancy stuff like Southern Collector Tony and Midlife Greg do. But right now, it's probably not great production. But I wanted to just go ahead and get moving. A couple of things that I left out is, like I said, the name of my channel is the Bugsy Collection, named after my dad, Bugsy. Here is a picture. I hope you can see that okay. And that is a picture of my dad's Knothole Baseball League team. And that is my dad, Bugsy, right there. And that's actually what the thumbnail is on the Bugsy Collection. So that's my dad. And he would have been in this picture, boy, I'm guessing, my dad was born in 1935. So I'm guessing this picture, he's 13 in that picture, 14. So this would have been probably 48, 49, something like that. And as you can see, the glove, Dad was a lefty. So that's one of the old 4-finger gloves. And I actually still have that. I have that displayed in my case over here. It's a Rawlings glove. That it's one of my most prized possessions. And wouldn't trade anything for that. So that's kind of how I got started. And I sort of left out, one thing I did leave out is when I got to the 9th grade, met a fellow by the name of Tony. You all know him as Southern Collector now, but this was long before Southern Collector was a thing. And we met in the 9th grade, and we've been best buddies ever since. Tony knew my folks. I knew his dad and his mom. And while we didn't collect together, our paths did cross some when we were collecting. It shows. There was a Mickey Mantle show that we were both at. There was a Hank Aaron show that we were both at. There's a college here that had a big show on campus once a year. When we were in high school, we both went to that. But the Lord was gracious enough and somehow shined on me, and our paths crossed, and we've been best buddies ever since. And my life is so much better because of the friendship that I have with Tony. So that gets us through somewhere in the early 90s, I guess. And like I said, my dad kept collecting. I'm out of it. Dad's got all of our stuff. Dad gets really, really, really big into racing cards, all things racing. He was a huge NASCAR fan. He actually raced. Him and his brother had a race car where they raced at the local racetrack here back in the 50s. And Dad got really big into NASCAR when they kind of came onto the scene with collecting in the 90s. So he stayed in the hobby. I'm out of the hobby. I then get married, and we have 3 kids. 2 oldest are girls, youngest is a boy. And of course, we would go visit mom and dad, and dad still had in their living room, he had this case that I'll show you sometime, but he had this big wooden display case that I actually made in woodshop when I was in high school just to put the baseball cards on. So that thing sat in the living room at mom and dad's house up until they no longer lived in their house. And it's actually here now. It's over to the right of me. And it was full of all the memorabilia, the cards. So I would see the stuff every time I would go over there. There were a couple of cabinets out in the garage that was just packed full of unopened wax boxes, sets that Dad had put together, and just a whole host of memorabilia, old Beckett's, old magazines, bats, balls, autographs, you name it. It was in those 2 cabinets. The odd part of our collecting journey and my collecting journey is as much fun as I had collecting with Dad. Once I was out of it, I was kind of out of it. And even though I would look at the cards and I would think they were cool when I would go over at mom and dad's house, the actual collecting just didn't really interest me anymore. I'm not really sure why. Maybe it was because I was so busy raising my own family, raising my kids. My son, huge baseball fan, played baseball all the way growing up, but we never went to any shows. And I can't really explain that. As close as he and I are, we've kind of gotten into cards a little bit together recently, but I don't know why we never collected together. But anyway, collecting wasn't on my radar. My mom passed away in 2016, and when my mom passed away, we sold my mom and dad's house, the only house that they had ever lived in, a 1,000 square foot house that I grew up in. And they had lived there for 59 years. So mom passed away. We sold the house. Dad moved in with us. Dad lived in this room that I'm in right now up until, it didn't look like this. It looked differently, but Dad lived in this room in our house for 8 years. We moved all of his cards to storage. And then he passed away in June. I think it was June the 1st of 2024. And when Dad passed away, I had, of course, I'm talking to Tony. Tony knows what's going on. And Tony had told me, Southern Collector Tony had told me, he had started talking to me a couple of years prior to that about he was back into baseball cards, and he had bought this and he had bought that. He had bought a 52 mantle. When he said he bought a 52 mantle, he kind of got my attention because, again, grading wasn't a thing back in the old days when I collected, but I knew grading was kind of sort of a thing now, and I knew the 52 mantle was a huge card. So when he said that, I thought, okay, he really is back into collecting. But it still didn't really register with me, and it didn't really interest me so much. And then if you fast forward to when Dad passed away, and so now I've got all of his cards, and I start going through them and I'm familiarizing myself a little more with grading and how grading works. starting to look into the current value of cards, and I realized, hey, Dad's got some pretty big cards here. And I started getting more interested in it, not because of what the cards were worth, but it was just sort of like a flame that had kind of gone out, or that had maybe been smoldering for some 30 years, was starting to light again. And so I'm talking to Tony one day. We were actually texting, and this would have been in I don't remember. This would have been probably in, well, it was after Dad passed away. It was in June. And we're texting, and I'm, going down memory lane, texting about Dad and the shows that we went to and memories that were being stirred up from looking at the cards. And I say to him out of the blue in a text, Tony, Dad always wanted to go to the National. And as much stuff as we did and as many shows that we went to, I have no idea why he didn't go to the National. And I said, I think this year's National is coming up in Cleveland. And I'm like, man, that'd be cool to go to. And it wasn't 2 minutes later, Tony texts me back and says, I just booked our flights. So, okay, so now we're headed to the National in Cleveland. And I spend the next month or so really studying up on grading, trying to decide, okay, I want to get the big cards, Dad's big cards, and I want to get those graded. How do I do that? And I'd never done this before. The thought of putting those cards in the mail and mailing them off myself terrified me. I'm like, there's no way I can do this. So I looked into some of the premium services at PSA where you could hand them your cards on site, and then you would get them back at the end of the show before you left. Now, granted, it was pretty expensive, but these were pretty big cards, and it seemed like it was worth it. So take a handful of cards with us. Decide I'm going to do that. I think Tony took his 59 mantle and got it graded. So we go to the National. Tony had never been to the National either. This was his first. So we go, and we don't really know what we're doing. But here's actually the first card that I got graded. I don't know if you can see that, but that is a 66 mantle that we got autographed in person. And we would have gotten this autograph at the show that I mentioned that Tony and I went to back when we were in the 9th grade. So got this beauty. I'm still irritated that it's a 7. I don't understand it. I like Sharpie autographs on cards. I know it dates it and it means it's not a playing days autograph, but personally, I like the Sharpie. I just like the Sharpie autographs, but I don't know why that's a 7, but I love the card. So anyway, we go to the show in Cleveland, and we don't really know what we're doing, but Tony has been back into collecting for a couple of years. And Tony has started watching the YouTubers. And so he has made contact with some of these folks, some of the YouTube community, but he had never met anybody in person. So we fly up Saturday morning. We don't really know that VIP tickets are a thing. So we don't get the VIP tickets, so we can't get in early. So in Cleveland, if you went to Cleveland at the National, the line was nowhere near as long as the line was in Chicago. And there was like this holding room where they corralled everybody. But we did have to wait in line. We actually met a lot of cool people in line. Actually met one guy who works at Fenway and works inside the Green Monster, and I actually have his phone number. He gave me his phone number. So we go to the show in Cleveland. We don't really know anybody. We get some cards graded, and then Thursday night, Tony says, so we go to the show Wednesday night. We get up and get to the show when it opens on Thursday. We stay all day, and Tony says, so, Tim, there's a YouTube meetup Thursday night that I want to go to. at the Cleveland VFW. And I'm like, what, Tony, what are you talking about? And he said, well, it's a meetup of the people who make YouTube videos about baseball card collecting. A large portion of those folks will be there, and it's just kind of like it's a hangout. It's for these folks to meet. I've met a lot of them online. I've never met them in person. I want to go. So I said, okay. And if you know Tony, you know how much of a extrovert Tony is. And you guys don't know me, but I am not an extrovert. I am an introvert. Used to be super introverted, wouldn't talk to anybody. I've gotten a lot better now, and I'm probably what I would refer to myself as an extroverted introvert. I'm still introverted, but I'm a lot better. I'll talk to people, but I'm not going to go in. If I go into a room, I'll talk to everybody I know. But really coming out of my shell and meeting people I don't know, that's still kind of tough for me, and it's not super natural. So that's why Tony, just another reason why the friendship with Tony has been so great, because that's what Tony does. Tony could talk to a light post. He was like my mom. He can talk to anybody. So we go to this meetup, and he's talking to everybody. And they had pizza. And I will say that when he said, I agreed to go to this, and I don't know if I've ever told Tony this, I did think, this might be a little weird. I'm not sure I'm gonna like this. But we went, and it was awesome. It was awesome. I'm listening to these stories. I didn't have a whole lot to say. I did meet a couple of people there that were just super awesome. Lonely Basement Keith. I met Keith there. Billy Ballgame. Met those two guys there. I also should have said before, there were a couple of people that Tony did know, and I don't know if he had talked to them or was texting ahead of time. He hadn't met them in person, but he did know Midlife Greg and Mookie Chilson. So I did meet both of those guys at the show before we went to the YouTube meetup, and they were just awesome. They were like the kind of guys that it was like we had always been friends. And they were immediately friends with me because I was friends with Tony, and they were friends with Tony. So we go to the meetup, and I mean, again, I'm not really back into the hobby at this point. I should say that one of the main reasons I went to the National was to take these big cards to see what they were worth, okay? And I told my wife I was going to look at selling them. But at the last minute, I kind of slipped into my pocket a couple of grand that I took with me. I thought, I don't know. Just seems like the right thing to do. I might find something there that I like. So we're at the meetup, and we're talking to guys, and like I said, it was just fun. It was fun hearing all these people talk about baseball cards and players and stuff from the 50s and 60s and the 40s, and just had a really great time. And so at this point, I had bought a few cards while we were at the show. I don't remember exactly what I bought, but my $2,000 had depleted a little bit. So then we go to the show on Friday, and we stayed all day, and we came back Friday night. And Friday, Tony's like, you need to focus. You need to determine what your focus is for what you're buying. I'm like, I don't have any idea what my focus is, dude. I haven't done this in 30 years. But I do know pretty quickly that, after seeing all the cards, and, I know what I can afford and what I can't afford. And I can afford some nice cards for some players, but not, on other players. So my dad was a big Yankees fan, and we're Cubs fans. So I thought, I'm going to start chasing Whitey Ford, Yogi Berra, Ernie Banks. So I start buying base cards for those three guys, and it was just fun. So I come back home, And, we get back home that Friday night, and my wife's like, well, did you sell everything? And I said, did I sell everything? I said, well, I got everything graded that I took, and also spent $2,000 on baseball cards and bought all of this stuff. So she didn't care. She thought it was awesome that that I had found something, that was fun. So get back from the show and kind of start learning about the space. Tony puts me onto 3 or 4 or 5 Facebook groups, vintage baseball cards. You guys know what they are. And I join all of those groups and just start looking for Whitey, Ernie, Yogi in those groups. And also, at the same time, I've got all of this stuff in storage that belonged to my dad and my mom. And we've been housing this stuff in storage since Dad moved in here because we didn't have any room for all of it. And a large portion of it is, like I said, I had those 2 huge metal cabinets, probably 5 feet wide by 7 feet tall, 2 of those full of stuff. And I knew that I didn't want to keep that stuff. I'm not into this. I'm not into the sets from the late 70s and 80s and 90s and all the unopened wax, lots of 80s wax, golf wax, NASCAR die cast. I've got pictures of it that I'll share at some point. So I'm like, okay, I got to sell this stuff. And I know now, after going to something like the National and looking in these Facebook groups, that there is a market for it. So I start figuring out what I'm going to do. Well, I've also got a ton of autographs. Had a ton of baseballs. None of this stuff had been authenticated, though. The very first person that I talked to about selling the baseballs, they're like, you're never going to sell this stuff because they hadn't been authenticated. Well, he was wrong. Maybe I could have sold it for more if they had been authenticated, but I got all the doubles of Hall of Famer baseballs and sold all of that stuff. So over the next, between when we get back from the National and Thanksgiving, I'm selling stuff like crazy on Facebook, posting sets, magazines, baseballs. I'm doing, if somebody seemed like they were interested, I would start private messaging them in Facebook. I met a couple of people. One guy came over to the house. I'm giving stuff away. But by the time we get to Thanksgiving, and I'm kind of tired of it by then because I'm shipping stuff nonstop. I didn't ship the sets. I did find somebody local to sell all the sets to. But I pretty much move all of that stuff. I'm down now. I've still got quite a bit left, but it's stuff that I'm going to keep some of it, and then some I'll probably sell. But I built that war chest of cash for my next purchases. And after we went to the National last year, and then during that time when I was selling, I was also buying. So by then, I'm fully hooked. I mean, I'm like, I've taken the hook and I've swallowed it. So I'm building this war chest of cash for the National this year. And then over the course of that year and then leading up to the National, I got a group text. Me and Tony and Mookie and Greg, we have a group text, and we talk all the time, and they're super supportive, and they love the stuff that I buy, and they make me feel good, and they never say, man, your stuff is they're just awesome. They're awesome. They always comment like your stuff is the greatest. They never try to make you feel bad. They're always very accepting. And it's just fun. It's just fun. So we go to the National this year, me and Tony. And Tony's like, okay, we're going to go to the YouTuber thing. Mookie's not going to be able to go because he has a family commitment, but Greg is going to be there. Greg's dad is going to be there. There's another guy that's going to be there. We're going to hang out. We're going to go to breakfast. We're going to go to dinner. And I kind of found myself, even though we had so much fun last year, and even though I met so many people and all the people were awesome, I'm going to be honest, I was sort of overloaded again because, like I said, I'm a bit of an introvert. And knowing you're going to be around new people that you don't know, I don't know if it stresses me out, but I'm still just not super comfortable with it. But I go with it. I'm like, sure, okay, we're going to do it. And we go and meet 4 more awesome people. The first 2 awesome people that I met is Coach Greg Miller's dad, and just the nicest man, great cards. But we spent a lot of time, me and him, walking one night to dinner, walking to the convention, not even talking about cards, just kind of talking about life and what he used to do as a school teacher and what he did as a coach, and him asking me about church and about my life, and just a really, really awesome dude. And then the other guy, Mike Petty. I met Mike, and I think Mike had some flight issues, so he may have wound up getting to the show a little bit later than he had originally planned. But when he walked up, he's saying hi to Greg and to Coach, and he already knew those guys, and to Tony. He hugged Tony. And then he comes over and he hugs me. Totally disarming. And just so nice. We ate together 1, 2, 3, 4 times, I think, while we were there. And they're just the kind of guys that I just feel like we're buddies now. Met a couple of other great guys. Clemente Collector. Met him one night. Super nice guy. Also met Vintage Dan. We just sat down and just chatted at the what's it called, in the lounge one day, and I was showing him a raw card that I had bought of Yogi Berra, and it had looked like it measured to me, but he got his little eyeglass out and was looking at it, and it was just so cool. And as I sat there, and I had so much fun, and I had never really been into, I'm watching, before I go to the National, I'm starting to watch the YouTubers more, because all of a sudden I'm back into it now, and it's really interesting. And I'm watching the YouTubers, I'm looking at stuff on Instagram, kind of getting into it more. And then we get back, and I'm like, I don't have... I'm never going to have some cool Babe Ruth card or some awesome 52 Topps mantle or some rare T205 Ty Cobb. I don't have the money to do those things. But you know what? It doesn't really matter. I'm just going to collect what I want to collect, and I'm going to hang out with my friends. And it just seemed like that now is the right time for me to start a Instagram channel, or an Instagram account, and a YouTube channel where I can kind of talk about what's going on with my collecting, and it gives me just kind of a gateway to share stories about my dad and sort of keep him alive. And Dad didn't work in technology. He never could understand me. Whenever I would try to explain the concept of Bluetooth to him, he just couldn't get it. And he wouldn't understand what's going on with YouTube and how he'd be like, what's the YouTube? And how do you get YouTube? And what channel is it on TV? And he wouldn't understand any of that, but he would think it was cool because I'm doing it. Anyway, that's kind of why I'm doing it. Oh, one thing I left off earlier that I was going to show is You know, this was pre-grading, and Dad was a big Pete Rose guy, and I've still got a bunch of cards that were my dad's that are in the cases, the old school cases. Man, if there's any old timers out there that collected back in the 80s and 90s, here's one old school case. You know, that's a double, and it's got a little stand that it sits in, but we got those cards autographed in person. Pete Rose was one of Dad's guys. So anyway, that's kind of my story. I don't have any idea what I'm going to post about or stories that I'm going to tell going forward. I'm not sure. I'll figure it out as I go. My quality, I hope, will get better. I'll get some coaching, of course, from Southern Collector Tony, from Midlife Greg, from Mookie Chilson. And I guess my final thing that I would like to say is a little bit of advice, and not that I have expert card advice, because you know the majority of you guys know way more about collecting than I have, because you have been back in the game or have been doing it longer than I have anyway. But I think the one thing that it has a couple of things that have really solidified in my mind as I've gotten back into collecting. And the first one is, although so much has changed with collecting versus back in the 80s, now you don't have to go to a show. You got YouTube, you've got Facebook, you can connect and see cards that way. All of that has changed. The grading has, you know, being part of the hobby, that's changed. What hasn't changed is the goodness of the people. And all of those names that I gave you before that I had met back in the 80s with my dad, the Walter Griffin, Ed Gaddy, Big Jim, Bill Clifford, Travis Porter, Ray Dunning, those people are still around. But now those people go by the names of Southern Tony, Mookie, Midlife Greg, Lonely Basement Collector, Keith, Billy Ballgame, Coach Mike Petty, Vintage Dan, Clemente Collector. The folks are just awesome. And thank you so much for accepting me just for my goofy Southern self and who I am. The fact that I'm, you know, not the most outgoing guy, but you've just kind of embraced me and just supported me getting back into it, whether you even knew you were supporting me or not. So that's the first thing. It's just the goodness of the people. And one of the things that I have found also that I meant to say as I'm going through Dad's cards, and yeah, I sold a ton of stuff, but I've also given a fair amount of it away, some in bulk, some individual things that I've pulled out and sent to folks that I've met them and hear what they're into, and, you know, well, hey, I've got this and I'll send it to you. The joy that brings me, because of the joy that I see it bringing somebody else, has just been awesome. And the goodness that folks have shown to me and things that they have given to me, it's just an awesome community. So that's one thing. I guess the advice that I would share, and this is advice that I gave to my kids when they were growing up, because the area that we live in is fairly affluent, but we're not affluent at all. And I told my kids growing up, we're not going to worry about what everybody else is doing. We're not going to worry about trips other people are going on, or about how big their house is or how new their cars are. We're not in a comparison game, guys. Guys aren't into comparison games. Embrace what those other folks are doing. Be happy for them, but we're not going to play the game of trying to keep up with somebody else. We're just going to keep our blinders on. We're going to love each other, and we're going to have fun with each other, and we're going to live within our own means. So that's what I would say with your collecting journey is, sure, it's always fun to maybe look at a big card you want to chase, or maybe you want to unload a bunch of your cards so you can buy one big card. Sure, all those things are fun, but just enjoy what you have enjoy the means that you have, whatever it is. If you're collecting commons, if you're collecting $3 cards, uh, if you're collecting, $100 cards, $1,000 cards, whatever it is, just be thankful for it and have fun with it. And don't let what you don't have affect the joy and the happiness and the blessings that you do have. So that's the main thing that I would ask everybody to remember when you're collecting. So as I said here, I got back from the National, and it was sort of like the day after Christmas, where there was a bit of or Christmas night actually. It's kind of a letdown. There's just been this big, huge buildup, and it's awesome. And you open all the packages. Now what? Well, I don't know what. The next big show, I'm hoping I get to go to Strongville. I couldn't go this past year because of a family commitment that we had going on, but it looks like I probably will be able to go to Strongville next year, and then, of course, the National after that. But what am I going to do between now and then? I have no idea. I'm not sure where I'm going to get my content from that I'm going to post, but I'm sure I'll come up with something. I'm sure there'll be some stories to tell, some things I want to share. So anyway, I'll shut up. That's all I have for now. Big shout out one more time to my buddy Tony, Southern Collector, and I just want to thank him again for all of his love and support. He's a brother to me. He actually had me on his YouTube channel, I don't know, a month or so ago for an episode called The Bugsy Chronicles, where I told 5 or 6 stories about collecting with my dad. And I think we're going to do a part 2, and we'll still do it over on his channel. But just big thanks to Tony. Thanks to all of you guys. And I can't wait to see everybody again. I can't wait to keep buying cards. I can't wait to look at my cards. I think I probably will do a show recapping my experience at the National. I think I bought 27 cards at the National. I got everything that I went after. I was able to find it. So I'll probably do that coming up. And I guess that's about it. Thanks for joining today on the Bugsy Collection. And as my dad used to say to me, want to go to a card show?